What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to Hip Hop Offtrack, where we talk about the artists, producers, and people in hip hop who are making real moves outside of music. And today we're talking about somebody who represents Philly, pain, pressure, survival, and business growth all at the same time. We're talking about Meek Mill. Now, most people know Meek Mill for the music first. They know the battle rap come up, they know the bike life, they know the mixtapes, they know Dream Chasers, they know the anthems, they know Dreams and Nightmares, they know the Philly energy. But when you really look at Meek Mill's story, it is much bigger than the rap. This is a story about turning struggle into leverage. It is about taking attention and turning it into ownership. It is about being knocked down by the system and then coming back with enough power to help change the system. And that is why Meek Mill belongs on Hip Hop Off Track, because this show is not just about who had the hottest record. It is about who took hip hop influence and used it outside the booth. And with Meek, the business story is different. It is not just restaurants. It is not just liquor. It is not just clothing. It is not just investments. Meek's business story is about music ownership, sports retail culture, criminal justice reform, philanthropy, and creating a bigger platform for the people coming behind him. Before we get into the business moves, we have to talk about who Meek Mill is. Meek Mill, born Robert Meek Williams, came out of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. And if you know anything about Philly, you know Philly does not play about authenticity. Philly is a tough city. It is a talented city. It is a city full of pain, pride, hunger, and raw creativity. And Meek came from that energy. He built his name through battle rap, street DVDs, mixtapes, and pure hunger. Before the world knew him as a major artist, Philly knew him as one of them ones. He was rapping like his life depended on it, and that hunger became part of his brand. That is one of the reasons people connected to Meek early. He did not sound polished. He sounded urgent. He sounded like somebody trying to escape something. He sounded like somebody trying to win for everybody who had been counted out. And that is what made Dream Chasers bigger than just a mixtape title. Dream Chasers became a mindset. It became a movement. It became the name that followed Meek from the streets to the industry to the business world. And that brings us to one of his biggest business moves, Dream Chasers Records. Dream Chasers Records is Meek Mill's label imprint. And this is important because Meek was not just trying to be an artist forever, he wanted to build a platform. In 2019, Meek launched Dream Chasers Records as a joint venture with Roc Nation, with Jay-Z standing beside him. That was a major moment because this was not just Meek signing another deal. This was Meek stepping into a president role. This was Meek saying, I want to build the next generation. That is a different level of business thinking. A lot of rappers want to be stars, but the next step is learning how to build stars. And that is what a label represents. A label is not just a logo. A label is artist development. A label is marketing, and a label is distribution. A label is relationships. A label is business structure. A label is knowing how to take talent and turn it into a career. And Meek knows what it feels like to be the talent trying to get seen. So when he steps into the label owner role, he is bringing experience from both sides. He knows what it feels like to come from the bottom. He knows what it feels like to be misunderstood. He knows what it feels like to need a real opportunity. And that can make him valuable as an executive because he understands the artist mindset. But at the same time, being a label executive is not easy. You cannot just sign people because they are talented. Talent is only one part. You need structure, you need discipline, you need a real rollout, you need money management, and you need patience, you need the right team, and you need the ability to tell artists the truth, even when they do not want to hear it. That is the challenge for Meek with Dream Chasers Records. Can he turn the Dream Chasers movement into a long-term company? That is the bigger question. But the move itself matters because Meek went from chasing a dream to owning part of the dream machine. That is growth. Now let's talk about another major business move outside of music, lids. In 2019, Meek Mill became a co-owner of Lids, the hat and sports apparel retailer. That move made a lot of sense because Meek's brand connects directly to sports culture, streetwear, fitted hats, jerseys, and city pride. Lids is not random for him. This is a company that lives in the same world as hip hop fans, sports fans, sneakerheads, and streetwear culture. And that is where Meek has influence. And this is one of the smartest things an artist can do. Invest in something that already connects to your audience. And a lot of celebrities invest in businesses that do not make sense for their brand. But Meek investing into Lids made sense. He comes from a culture where fitted hats matter, where team gear matters, where sports and streetwear overlap, where people wear their city on their head and their chest. So for Meek, Lids was not just a financial move, it was a culture move. And that is important because when an artist invests in a business that connects to their real lifestyle, the promotion feels natural. It does not feel forced. Meek can talk about Lids because it matches who he is. That is a lesson for every artist and entrepreneur watching this. Do not just chase deals, chase alignment. The best business move is usually the one that makes sense with your image, your audience, and your story. And Lids fit all three. Now, the Lids move also connected Meek to a bigger business network. That network includes Michael Rubin, Fanatics, sports retail, licensed apparel, and major sports business relationships. That matters because relationships are part of business. Sometimes the investment itself is only one part of the opportunity. The room it puts you in can be just as valuable. When Meek gets connected to people in sports retail, apparel, licensing, and ownership, he is learning a different side of the game. That is not rap business. That is corporate business. That is distribution. That is retail. That is sports licensing. That is merchandising. That is brand partnerships. And those are the type of rooms artists need to be in if they want to go beyond music. Because music gives you attention, but business relationships give you opportunity. That is one of Meek's biggest strengths. He has built relationships with some very powerful business people. And instead of just standing around them, he has turned some of those relationships into moves. That is the difference. A lot of people are around power. Meek has been learning how to use proximity to power. That brings us to Mitchell and Ness. Mitchell and Ness is a legendary sports apparel company from Philadelphia. And that Philly connection is important because Meek being connected to a group that invested in Mitchell and Ness is not just business, it is hometown history. Mitchell and Ness is part of sports fashion, throwback jerseys, vintage team gear, classic sports culture. And for Philly, it carries even more meaning because the company started there. So when Meek is connected to that investor group, it is another example of him tying his brand to sports, apparel, culture, and Philadelphia pride. Again, this is not random. This is the lane. Meek's business moves keep circling back to the same world. Sports, culture, Philly, streetwear, ownership, influence. That is how you know there is a bigger pattern. Now let's talk about Reform Alliance. This might be the most important part of Meek Mill's story outside of music because Reform Alliance is bigger than business. It is advocacy, it is policy, it is criminal justice reform, it is taking personal pain and turning it into public impact. Meek's own legal situation became a national conversation. After years of probation issues and legal battles, Meek became a symbol of how the probation and parole system can trap people for years. His case sparked outrage. People rallied behind him. Artists spoke up, fans spoke up, Jay-Z spoke up, Michael Rubin spoke up, and eventually Meek came home with a whole new mission. That mission became part of Reform Alliance. Reform Alliance was created to help transform probation and parole laws, change outdated systems, and create better pathways for people who are stuck in the justice system. That is powerful because Meek could have just came home and focused only on music. He could have said, I'm free now. I'm good. But he did not do that. He helped turn his situation into a movement. And that is a different kind of leadership. Now, some people may say, is that really business? And for Hip Hop Offtrack, the answer is yes, because impact is part of legacy. Influence is an asset. Policy work is power. And when an artist can move from music to activism to actual institutional change, that is a form of ownership too. It is ownership of your story, ownership of your platform, ownership of your purpose. Meek's work with Reform Alliance shows that hip hop influence can reach courtrooms, legislation, policy discussions, and state level reform that is much bigger than a song. That is using celebrity as a tool. And when you think about the number of people affected by probation and parole, this is not a small issue. This is a national issue. So when Meek steps into that space, he is not just representing himself, he is representing people who do not have the microphone he has. That is why this move matters so much. Meek took one of the most painful chapters of his life and turned it into something that could help other people. That is legacy work. Now let's talk about culture currency. After Meek's long relationship with Roc Nation Management ended, he later formed a strategic partnership with WME. That partnership was connected to a new initiative called Culture Currency. The idea behind culture currency is important. It is about helping artists, athletes, entertainers, and cultural leaders create more opportunities in entertainment, brand partnerships, and business. That is a powerful concept because culture has always created value. The problem is the people who create the culture are not always the ones who own the value. Hip hop creates trends, athletes create attention, influencers create movement, artists create language, but a lot of times corporations come in and make the real money. Culture currency, at least as a concept, speaks directly to that problem. It is saying the people who shape culture need better access to business opportunities. And that fits Meek's story perfectly because Meek understands what it means to have influence and still have to fight for control. He understands what it means to be valuable before the system fully respects your value. And if culture currency can help younger artists and athletes turn their influence into business, that could become a major platform. That is another example of Meek thinking beyond just himself. He is not only asking, how do I get more deals? He is asking, how do we help the next wave understand their worth? That is the kind of thinking that separates a hustler from a builder. A hustler gets money, a builder creates systems. And Meek seems to be trying to move more into the builder lane. Now, let's also talk about philanthropy. Meek Mill, Kevin Hart, and Michael Rubin have been involved in major donations connected to Philadelphia area schools. That matters because philanthropy is part of the bigger ownership conversation, too. When people from the city make it out and put money back into education, scholarships, technology, and resources, that is not just charity, that is reinvestment. That is saying, I remember where I came from and I want the next generation to have more options. Meek's story is heavily tied to Philadelphia. He carries Philly everywhere he goes. So when he is involved in giving back to Philly schools, that lines up with the brand. And again, the pattern stays the same. Philly youth opportunity, justice, culture, ownership. That is Meek's business world. It is not just one company, it is a whole identity. Now, one thing we have to respect about Meek Mill is that his business journey has not always been clean or quiet. Meek is outspoken and he gets into public disagreements. He tweets what he feels. He challenges the industry. He speaks up about contracts. He talks about artist rights. He talks about money. He talks about labels. He talks about how artists get treated. Sometimes people agree with him. Sometimes people criticize him. Sometimes the message gets lost because of how loud the delivery is. But underneath all of that, there is a real business issue. Like a lot of artists do not understand their contracts. A lot of artists do not own their masters. A lot of artists are famous, but not financially free. A lot of artists generate millions, but do not control the machine. So when Meek talks about ownership and contracts, he is touching a real topic. And that topic matters on this channel because Hip Hop Offtrack is about what happens outside the music. And contracts are one of the biggest outside the music problems artists face. You can have hit records and still not own your future. You can be famous and still be financially trapped. You can have fans all over the world and still not control your catalog. That is why Meek's voice in those conversations matters, even when the conversation gets messy. He is pointing at something real. Now, another lesson from Meek's business story is the power of personal brand. Meek Mill's brand is built around ambition, dream chasing, survival, Philly pride, or pain and motivation and comebacks. That is why Dream Chasers work so well. It is not just a label name, it is not just a mixtape series, it is a whole identity. Our people connect to it because everybody has a dream they are chasing. That is strong branding. That the best brands make people feel like they are part of something. Dream Chasers does that. It gives fans a mindset. It gives artists a movement. It gives Meek a business umbrella. That is why the name can stretch into music, clothing, sports, events, philanthropy, and more. Because the name is not too narrow. It is emotional. It is motivational. It is easy to understand. And it belongs to Meek's story. That is what every artist should study. A great brand should be able to grow with you. Meek started with Dream Chasers as a music movement. Now it can become a label, a lifestyle, a business network, and a platform for others. That is how you build long term value. Now let's talk about the bigger lesson with Meek and Michael Rubin. Their relationship has been one of the most visible artist business relationships in modern hip hop. Michael Rubin is a major sports and commerce businessman. Meek is a major artist from Philly with real cultural influence. Together, they have been connected through friendship, business, philanthropy, and criminal justice reform. That relationship shows something important. Artists need relationships outside of music. If everybody around you only understands the music industry, your opportunities may stay limited. But when you build relationships with people in sports, retail, tech, philanthropy, law, politics, and business, you start seeing different plays. That is one thing Jay-Z has always understood. That is one thing Meek seems to be learning and applying. Your network can change your ceiling. The right relationship can put you in a room that changes your life, but you have to bring value too. Meek brings culture, Meek brings attention, Meek brings authenticity, Meek brings a real story. Meek brings access to a generation that many corporate leaders cannot reach on their own. That is value. And when cultural value connects with business infrastructure, big things can happen. That is what we see in Meek's story. Now, let's be honest about something. Meek Mill's business portfolio may not be as cleanly packaged as some other artists. With somebody like Rick Ross, you can point to franchises. With Nas, you can point to tech investments. With 50 Cent, you can point to vitamin water, TV, and production. With Styles P, you can point to juice bars and wellness. Meek is different. Meek's business story is more about platform, influence, advocacy, sports, retail, culture, and network building. That does not make it less important. It just makes it a different type of business story. Meek is still in the middle of building his second act. The first act was survival and music. The second act is ownership and influence. And then that second act is still being written. That is why this episode is interesting, because we are not just looking back at what Meek already built. We are also watching what he is becoming. Can Dream Chasers Records become a true powerhouse label? Can Culture Currency become a real pipeline for artists and athletes? Can Meek keep using his platform to push justice reform? Can his business relationships turn into more ownership plays? Can he become one of the main Philly figures connecting hip hop, sports, business, and community impact? Those are the questions. And honestly, the potential is there because Meek has something you cannot buy. He has a real story. He has real pain and he has real influence. He has a real city behind him. And he has real relationships with people who understand business at a high level. Now, what he does with all of that is the next chapter. But the foundation is already serious. And when we look at Meek Mill outside of music, we see several major lanes. First, Dream Chasers Records, his move into label ownership and artist development. Second, Lids, where he became connected to sports retail and apparel ownership. Third, Mitchell Ness, where he was part of an investor group connected to a legendary Philly sports apparel brand. Fourth, Reform Alliance, where he used his personal legal battle to help push criminal justice reform. Fifth, Culture Currency and the WME Partnership, which is about expanding business opportunities for cultural leaders. Sixth, philanthropy and giving back to Philadelphia schools and youth. And when you put all of that together, you see the real story. Meek Mill is not just trying to be rich, he is trying to be powerful. And there is a difference. Rich is having money, powerful is having influence, ownership, relationships, and the ability to open doors for other people. That is the level Meek seems to be chasing now. And that is why he belongs on Hip Hop Offtrack, because his story shows that business is not always about owning a product. Sometimes it is about owning your platform. Sometimes it is about owning your pain. Sometimes it is about owning your comeback. And sometimes it is about making sure the next person does not have to go through the same struggle you went through. That is the deeper part of Meek's story. He came from Philly street rap. He fought through the system. He became a star. He became a symbol. Then he started building with people who could help him turn that symbol into real impact. That is powerful. And for all the young artists watching, the lesson is simple. Do not just chase fame, chase leverage. And do not just chase streams, chase ownership. Do not just chase attention, chase relationships that can put you in better rooms. And most importantly, do not let your pain go to waste. Meek Mill could have let his legal battles break him. Instead, he turned them into a national conversation. He turned them into reform work. He turned them into purpose. That is one of the strongest business moves anybody can make, turning your worst chapter into your strongest platform. So salute to Meek Mill. Salute to the Dream Chasers movement. Salute to Philly. And salute to every artist trying to turn music into something bigger than music, because that is what this channel is about.